Hello, it's time for my January wrap-up, and I'm going to be including DNFs in my wrap-ups from now on if there are any. If you've watched my 2022 kind of goals video, you will know that I am hoping to mood read more this year and to trust myself and DNF books when I'm not enjoying them. So that's the plan for wrap-ups this year, I think, and we'll see how it goes. I'm still going to try to keep these pretty rapid fire in terms of my thoughts about each book, and then if there's anything specific you want to ask me, you can do, and if you want me to do dedicated reviews on any of these, then let me know that and I'm happy to do that too. In January I read 15 books and I DNF'd 4 books, so I will talk about all 19 of those books. Of the ones that I finished, 5 were by BIPOC authors and 9 were from my top 22 for 2022 list. I read a total of 6,420 pages according to the Storygraph, and we will jump right in to the DNFs. That's where I'll start. So firstly was Roxy by Neil and Jared Schusterman. This is their most recent release, and it was just a little bit too literary and metaphorical in style for me. It essentially follows the personification of drugs and allows the authors to explore the conversation about the impact that prescription pain medication can have on people and society in general. It just wasn't quite straightforward enough in terms of writing style for me, and so I knew pretty quickly that I just wasn't going to mesh with it, so I decided to DNF it. The next one was Earthlings by Sayaka Murata and translated by Ginny Tapley Takamori. Again, this one was just a little bit too strange in writing style for me, a little bit too literary, and it just didn't grab my attention, so I decided to move on from it. The next one was Before the Coffee Gets Cold by Toshikazu Kawaguchi and translated by Jeffrey Trusalo. Again, same exact thing with this one. Too literary in style, too metaphorical in nature, just didn't grab my attention. And then finally, one that I own a copy of and that is just so incredibly sad because this is one of my, or was one of my anticipated releases for last year, 2021, and the edition I have is beautiful. I am going to be keeping it because I am a book collector as well as a reader, but it's A Marvellous Light by Freya Marske, which was also actually on my top 22 for 2022 list, so even more sad. I have this Illumicrate edition. I'm not ruling out coming back to this, but I just found the writing style, again, a little bit literary in style. The characters, I didn't connect to them, which is super important to me, and I found the plot a little bit slow and not especially engaging. And I got quite far into that one. I think I was about 40% of the way through when I decided, you know what, this is not working for me. So again, I may come back to it in the future, but as of right now, it just wasn't working for me, so I put it down. Okay, so that's it for the DNFs. Everything else I finished, which means that I was enjoying it enough to finish it. So that is the positive thing that comes out of this, is that the vast majority of what I then read, I actually enjoy. So I started off the year by reading Blaze Wrath Games by Amparo Ortiz, which follows, and I'm terrible with names, Lana Torres, who would like to join the Blaze Wrath team for Puerto Rico? Yeah, Puerto Rico. And the Blaze Wrath Games are, well, it's this competition that's a little bit like tag, I guess. You have to take this item from the home spot. You have to score some goals, and once some goals have been scored, then you can take this item to a location. But it's all played with with dragons. So it's very fun. I really enjoyed the competition element. There was a little bit of a mystery weaved through, which was enjoyable as well. I really liked the characters. I really enjoyed the world that the author created. It's kind of urban fantasy because it's our world, but with dragons. And I just really enjoyed myself reading this. It does have a sequel. I don't think I want to read the sequel though. I was really happy with this as a story on its own. So I don't think I'm going to be continuing with the duology, but I did really enjoy this and I'm glad that it was my first read of 2022. From there, I read Evershore, which is the last of the Skyward novellas, the Skyward Flight novellas by Jancy Patterson and Brandon Sanderson. I really enjoyed this one. It's from Jürgen's perspective. I don't really want to say any more than that plot wise, and I really can't talk about it too much because it's so short and because the content is so spoilery, but I thoroughly enjoyed this. It filled in a lot of gaps that I wanted filled. I've really enjoyed these novellas and this might have been my favourite of the three. Then I read Spin the Dawn, immediately followed by Unravel the Dusk by Elizabeth Lim. Now I've done a live show on my channel discussing Spin the Dawn with Elle from the channel Elliot Brooks, so I will link that for you. On that basis, I'm not going to really talk about these too much. I feel like most people know what these are about by now, and the fact that I read this one immediately after this one I think goes to show that I really enjoyed this. I didn't like this one as much as the first one, but I did still like it, and this was a duology that I finished in January, so that is extra exciting too. Really enjoyed these, super glad I read them. I have a full video talking about my thoughts. From there, I read something with a very different tone, and that was Plain Bad Heroines by Emily M. Danforth. And I read this with my friend Lisa, who is not on YouTube, but she is on Instagram, so I'll go ahead and link her in the description. We buddy read this, and we both had pretty similar thoughts on it, to be honest. It's quite slow. It's a little bit on the meandering side. It has a very interesting but slightly confusing plot line. It's sort of a split timeline narrative, but I did really enjoy the majority of the perspectives that we had, and I enjoyed the plot lines that we were following. I was reasonably interested in the mystery, horror-y elements, but I didn't find them particularly scary, and I am quite a scaredy cat, so I don't think this is an especially scary book. There are some slightly gross elements, so if you're super sensitive to body horror type stuff, then I can just think of a couple of scenes that might be a little bit difficult for you, but otherwise this wasn't too bad at all, really. I enjoyed myself, but it is a little bit of a forgettable read. I can't really recall too much about it, and I only read it like, what, 30 days ago or so? Like, I remember it, but it's not, you know, I don't think about it often. So after that one though, I did want something slightly more cheerful, so I decided to read a couple of romances. The first one I read was The Honey Don't List by Christina Lauren. This is a fun story about two personal assistants to this couple who are kind of the goals couple, but actually their marriage is completely a disaster, and it's all very overly dramatic and tropey, but it was a fun and easy one to read, so I was glad of it for that. And then I read Rent a Boyfriend by Gloria Chow, which again is just a super fun and easy read. I think this one is more on the YA side of romance, but it's kind of older end of YA, I would say. And this is your fake dating trope, which is one of my favourites. I enjoyed myself. It wasn't amazing, but it, you know, it was nice and easy to read, and I was basically reading this as I was developing COVID, so it did what I needed it to do. Then I read Little Thieves by Margaret Owen. This one was really good fun. It was actually kind of humorous in a lot of places, which I don't think I was expecting. It is a fairy tale retelling, and it feels like one. It's got that fairy tale-esque vibe to it, which I really enjoyed, and I feel like it had really, really good atmosphere as well as great characters. So it had a lot going for it. It's also pretty easy to read because it's YA. I was definitely on the side of our protagonist, who is actually traditionally the antagonist of this story, because this is a Goose Girl retelling, and I haven't ever consumed the original Goose Girl story, but I thoroughly enjoyed this, and just thinking about my time reading this makes me smile, which is a positive thing, I think. Next up was Jade Fire Gold by June CL Tan. My experience with this one is really interesting because early on in the book, and I'm talking like chapter 1 or 2, I had convinced myself of a certain thing about one of the characters, and I was convinced that I was right, to the point that even when it was slowly being shown that that wasn't the case, I was still like, no, this is just the author trying to trick me. I'm definitely right. So it took me until about, I don't know, about 75-80% of the book to be like, oh, okay, I'm actually wrong. This wasn't the author trying to trick me. I just convinced myself of something that just was never true. So I think that really altered my experience of this book, and I'm being very vague because I don't want to spoil anything for anyone, but this basically follows two characters who are, I don't know, like, I feel like I can't describe this book because my experience of it was so tainted, not in a negative way, by the way that I experienced the book. So I actually don't even want to give a synopsis, really. Let me just read you what it says on the back. So this is the girl I have to put my faith in. This is the girl who will help me get my throne back. This is the girl who will either be my salvation or the damnation of the entire world. And there's magic, there's politics, there's, you know, a boy who wants to take back the throne. It's a really, really super fun time. But I can't help but be interested in how I would have felt about the book if I had not thought what I thought while I was reading it. So I really liked it, I enjoyed it, but yeah, it was just a bit weird. I'm actually going to speak about the next three together, even though I didn't read them back to back. I did binge this entire trilogy in the month of January, and I basically read book 1, Daughter of Smoke and Bone, then read another book, then read book 2, Days of Blood and Starlight, and then read another book, and then read Dreams of Gods and Monsters. And that was actually the last book I finished in the month of January, all by Lani Taylor. I am buddy reading, well, can I really call it buddy reading this since I just went ahead and read the whole lot? Basically, Vish from Books with V is running a channel buddy read of this trilogy in the months of January, February and March, and we're doing live shows for each one, but I clearly failed because I loved book 1 so much that I needed to know what was going to happen, so I read book 2, and then I loved book 2 so much that I needed to know what was going to happen, so I read book 3. And here we are. I read the whole trilogy, really thoroughly enjoyed myself, can definitely see myself rereading these 3 at some point, not straight away, but these will be added to the reread roster, I suspect. It's difficult for me to describe what this series is about because I've read the whole thing and I don't want to spoil anything, but basically we follow Karou. What does it say on the back of this one? Let me just do that. Okay, so she has 2 lives. On the one hand, she's a 17-year-old art student, and on the other, she runs errands for a monstrous creature who is the closest thing she has to family. Raised half in our world, half in elsewhere, she has never understood Brimstone's dark work, buying teeth from hunters and murderers, nor how she came into his keeping. She is a secret even to herself, plagued by the sensation that she isn't whole. This series is fantastic. It is really well written. I thoroughly enjoyed myself, and if you want to hear more thoughts about this one, head over to Vish's channel. We've discussed this one already, and make sure that you subscribe, because we will talk about this one in early March and this one in early April, which means that you still have time to read these with us, or with them because I've already read them, if you would like to. So, loved these, had a great time. So then I will talk about the other 3 that I read in between those. So the first one was Dark and Shallow Lies by Ginny Myers Sane. This is a YA thriller mystery type book. Basically we follow, what is her name? Gray, who has returned to La Cachette in Louisiana following the disappearance of one of her best friends, and her group of friends there get together, and Gray is really wants to find out what happened to her friend Elora. And I think that if you're at the younger end of the YA demographic, then you might find this creepy and you might find this gripping. I sadly did not. I felt that it was a little bit predictable. I didn't feel particularly connected to the cast of characters, and although it had that creepy vibe, I didn't really feel creeped out. And maybe my tolerance for this stuff is improving, which is a good thing because I am far too much of a scaredy cat for someone who's 30 years old. But yeah, this one just didn't really do for me what I was hoping for. I was interested enough to not want to DNF it, to want to continue and find out what happened, and I'm glad that I did that, but it wasn't a super successful book for me, unfortunately. Next, or not next, the next in-between book that I read was The Humans by Matt Haig, which has been on my TBR for maybe just slightly over a year. And I was really looking forward to reading this, and I did really enjoy it, but I don't think I got as much out of it as is possible to get out of it. So this is quite humorous in places. It wasn't hilariously funny like the whole way through, so it didn't succeed on that side of things for me. And really, this book is an examination of the human condition from the perspective of an alien. So there are a lot of interesting conversations in here, but it didn't bring anything new for me because these are all things that I have previously and personally considered. So it didn't give me any food for thought, which is interesting because I feel like the vast majority of adults would be in the same position as me. Maybe I'm wrong. If you've read this and you found it a really interesting discussion and it gave you things to think about that you'd not thought about before, then let me know. Maybe I'm just a really morose and morbid person, which is entirely possible, but I didn't get that from it, and I didn't get the comedy so much from it. And the thing is I feel like this would actually be really, these conversations would be really good for a YA book, but this is not YA appropriate, I don't think. So, I don't know. I was clearly interested enough to read the whole book, and I'm glad that I did that, but I just didn't get as much from it as I could have done, I think. And then finally, the last book for us to discuss is going to be very brief because it was a reread, and that is A Good Girl's Guide to Murder by Holly Jackson, which is a pretty quick reread. I only read this at the end of 2021, I think maybe November time, maybe October. I'm not 100% sure. The reason I reread this though is because I heard that the US version of this book was completely different. So I borrowed from one of my American friends' libraries the audiobook of the American version of this book, and this is the UK version of the physical book, and I read them together, and I can confirm that they are very different. None of the plot beats are different. The story itself is exactly the same, but the way that the story is written is very, very different. Basic examples of that are that this story, this version of this story takes place in Little Kimpton or Kilton. Little Kilton, I think. Basically a small British town. The whole story takes place in the UK. It's very British. The American version takes place in Connecticut, I think. So different setting. Some small things that are meaningless and that were changed were, for example, the characters would drink coffee in the American version and tea in the British version. No big deal. The bigger change is that in the US version there was much less focus on family and much more focus on the work that Pippa wasn't doing for school that she was supposed to be doing, whereas in this one it was reversed. So there was a little bit about the school stuff that she was missing out on, but more so there was an emphasis on family. Sorry that the camera has moved slightly, my battery died. So I just thought that those changes were interesting. And do I prefer the British version? Yes, I do. Is that because I'm British? Probably. And that's it for this one. Thank you so much for watching. If you like this video and want to see more like this from me, then do think about hitting that subscribe button, and I hope to see you here again soon. Thanks. Bye.